Welcome. I am Amy Lynn Andrus. I'm an associate director with the International Center for Law and Religion Studies, and I will be moderating this opening session. We'll begin our Religious Freedom Annual Review and this opening session with an invocation given by Imam Talib M. Shareef of the Masjid Muhammad, the Nation's Mosque in Washington, D.C. After the invocation, I will turn the time over to Elizabeth Clark, Associate Director of our center, as well as Brett Scharffs, who is the Director of the center, for a few opening remarks. Thank you.
Morning and assalamu alaikum. God's peace be upon you all. Let us take the position of prayer. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. With Almighty God's name, the merciful benefactor, the compassionate, Almighty God, the wise, the highest possessor of greatness, the same God for all of us, who created us all and cares about us all equally. We give the complete praise and thanks to you for the blessings of this day, and we humbly seek your divine benevolence upon this esteemed institution, the organizers of this annual review, and upon this gathering of distinguished policymakers, scholars, and religious leaders who've come together to discuss the role of religion and religious freedom in America. As reflected in our nation's motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one, the whole being the result of many coming together to form one nation, under God, and as we pledge, indivisible, with liberty, freedom, and justice for all upon one humanity dating back to Adam. And from that shared identity came the many beautiful, wonderful, diverse expressions of human life, like those at this conference, that have contributed to the beauty and strength of America, a nation of nations, a country made up of people from every land, every religion. As this conference is focused on and reflective of our nation's reality, may you bless the results of this gathering to be maximized and assist our nation in its pursuit of a more perfect union, one that promotes and invites all to embrace our intrinsic nature, shared identity, and dignity as human beings, and live together intelligently in the spirit of universal kinship, mutual respect, tolerance for culture and religious differences, and to treat all citizens as the creation of you, Almighty God, the Creator. Amen.
Morning, and thank you, Imam Shareef. It's inspiring. I feel the blessings that I need in my life, so thank you. Scholars who study peace distinguish between making peace in the sense of ending conflict, ending a war, right, a conflict resolution, and what they call peace building, which is much more difficult. It's laying the foundations for people to live together harmoniously with respect. So this will require accepting pluralism, ensuring justice for all, as Imam Talib explained, acting on commitments to human dignity. Well, this year our theme at the Religious Freedom Annual Review is Living Peaceably, Religious Freedom as a Foundation for Civic Harmony. So we want to explore some of this. How can religious freedom be an important part of building a peaceful society? How can religious freedom help us to accept pluralism, ensure justice, and act on our commitments to human dignity? And what does that look like in practice? I'm delighted to have people here who can explore that and share their experiences. We'll have a series of breakouts on repairers of the breach, to adopt the Jewish term, tikkun olam, that will illustrate how religion contributes to a peaceful and just society, whether this is helping ex-convicts find a stable job in community, fighting genocide, or welcoming refugees. We'll also have thoughtful expressions of what religious freedom means legally, where the law is headed on major issues in the free exercise and establishment clauses, and also what kind of legislative solutions are proposed. And we'll address how, through a series of breakout sessions, also how you can make a difference locally, building bridges, LGBTQ groups, or working across religious divides. Depending on the bubble you're in, you may hear a lot of talk about religious freedom and protecting the Constitution, or religious freedom as being part of discrimination or feeling excluded. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to religious freedom. But what I love is a statement from President Dallin Oaks, the first council in the first presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He shared sort of a vision that, for me, is incredibly deeply aspirational and something I'm working towards. He said, when we exercise our religious freedom to serve and lift, to strengthen community ties and pour oil on troubled waters, when we use our religious freedom to bring people together in unity and love, which is where one of our panel's title comes from, we are defending and preserving religious liberty and the Constitution in a most profound way. And this makes me think of Aristotle's suggestion, at least as some scholars take it, that civil harmony that we're trying to build, this peaceful, just society, is ultimately just the political implications, the political application of friendship. Said friendship seems to be the bond that holds communities together. And our community bonds have been fraying very badly in our country. But this idea of friendship has particular meaning for those of us who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Joseph Smith taught that friendship is one of the grand fundamental principles of our belief. It's designed to revolutionize the world and cause wars and contentions to cease and men to become friends and brothers. Now, this isn't just a superficial friendship that glosses over real difficulties, real challenges. If we care about people, we want to address what their concerns and challenges are. But it's a friendship, and here's again, I'm quoting Joseph Smith, that friendship which intelligent beings would accept as sincere must arise from love. And that love grow out of virtue, which is as much a part of religion as light is a part of Jehovah. Hence the saying of Jesus, greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. I'm looking forward to the wonderful presenters we have on this panel and throughout the day. And I'm looking forward to these opportunities to learn and to build these kinds of sincere friendships so that in our small way, that we're bonding individuals and communities together, finding ways to live peaceably and create civic harmony. Thank you.
Imam Talib, thank you for that invocation. It's not often that an opening prayer says virtually everything that needs to be said for the entire day. After that invocation, I had the feeling that if we just tried to do everything that he had prayed for us to do, that the world would be a better place. And we could actually go home and call it good. So thank you very much, my friend. That was really lovely. Good morning. My name is Brett Scharffs. I'm the director of the International Center for Law and Religion Studies. And on behalf of my colleagues and students here at Brigham Young University, at the J. Reuben Clark Law School, and the International Center for Law and Religion Studies, welcome. After 2 years with online-only versions of the Religious Freedom Annual Review, it is my pleasure to welcome those of you who are here in person. What a fine sight you are. And having learned much about online gatherings, I'm also pleased to welcome the large group who are participating online. I would also like to make a special welcome to our speakers and panelists, many of whom have traveled from long distances to be with us here in person. We're very grateful to each of you. Our theme this year is, we hope, especially apropos of the moment in which we find ourselves. Living peaceably, religious freedom as a foundation for civic harmony. Our hope is that each of us will leave today this evening, after a long day of enriching learning and a capstone of Elder Quentin L. Cook's discussion with a group of his friends, important religious leaders from New York, feeling more positive, more energetic, more empowered, and more hopeful about the ways we can each lift where we stand in being peacemakers, in our families and neighborhoods, in our wards and parishes, at school board and city council meetings, and in many other ways where our voices are sorely needed. For the last few days, I've been asking myself, maybe I spend too much time watching the news or online reading the news, asking myself, are things better or worse than they seem? With so many challenges in our lives, personal as well as political, it would be easy to conclude that things are at least as bad as they seem. With the coronavirus's lingering and lasting effects, with inflation raging, have you filled your car up with gas? A terrible war of aggression in Ukraine, with gun violence, illegal immigration, and social media universe that, far from its promise 20 years ago of bringing people together, seems mostly to be a force for division, anger, and polarization. As someone who is disposed towards melancholy, for me personally, it is easy to believe things are worse than they seem. But our gathering today is dedicated to the proposition that perhaps things are better than they seem, and that we, each in our own ways, have the capacity to make them better yet. In addition to the plenary sessions and plenary discussions, we have breakout sessions organized around three themes. First, what can I do locally? Second, legislation in the courts. And third, repairers of the breach, religion making a difference. Feel free to join one of these tracks or to alternate between them, depending on what part of the program is appealing to you. Our hope is that you will leave disappointed in us that we made you make difficult choices and that you missed something you really wanted to hear. Let me conclude with three observations. First, we hope you will hear something today that you disagree with. We don't think this type of gathering works best if we bring together only people who agree about everything, as if that would even be possible. One thing we sorely need in our polarized political moment is the experience of listening carefully to and perhaps learning from people with whom we disagree. Second, while religion is often a topic that divides us, we believe religious freedom can actually bring us together, and that in advocating for each other, religious freedom can become a foundation for civic harmony. Finally, we hope you will hear something today that motivates you to return home with a new tool in your toolbox, or perhaps a tool sharpened, a heightened appreciation of a tool you already have, and that with those tools, we can each become repairers of the breach. So welcome. We're so glad you're here, and I'd like to turn the time to our Associate Director, Amy Andrus, who will moderate this morning's first plenary session. Amy?
I feel privileged to introduce the distinguished speakers who are opening this conference with their thoughts on why religious freedom matters to them. To give them ample time for their remarks, my introductions will be abbreviated, but I invite you to read more about our presenters in the online program. Chris Seiple, the President Emeritus of the Institute for Global Engagement, a think and do tank operating at the intersection of religion, realpolitik, and reconciliation. He has worked in Northern and Eastern Africa, the Middle East, Central and South Asia, China, and Southeast Asia. Dr. Seiple is Chief Executive Officer of the Sagestone Group and is Senior Fellow at the University of Washington's Jackson School of International Studies, where he teaches cross-cultural religious literacy. Reverend Marian Edmonds-Allen is Executive Director of Parity, a nonprofit that works at the intersection of faith and LGBTQ+ concerns. She is the author of Family Christian and the director of Blessed by Difference, a project that promotes curious and collaborative bridging across LGBTQ+ and faith divides. Her focus as a speaker, author, and educator is on inclusive religious freedom and theological methods for encountering others with love and curiosity. She is currently a Doctor of Ministry candidate at Eden Theological Seminary. Dr. Simran Jeet Singh is Executive Director of the Aspen Institute's program on religion and society and the author of The Light We Give, How Sikh Wisdom Can Transform Your Life. Recognized among Time Magazine's 16 people fighting for a more equal America, he is a Soros Equality Fellow with the Open Society Foundations, a Senior Advisor on Equity and Inclusion for YSC Consulting, and a visiting professor at Union Seminary. He's also a regular contributor to Time, CNN, and the Washington Post, and a monthly columnist for Religion News Service. Due to the tight time frame, I believe I am a moderator in name only, that we likely won't have time for questions and answers following Dr. Singh's remarks, but you may want to take mental notes of questions just in case we have a few extra minutes. We'll turn the time over to Dr. Seiple to begin.
Morning, and assalamu alaikum to our Muslim brothers and sisters in the audience. That was indeed a beautiful prayer, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. And I actually didn't want to be here. Elizabeth sent me the invitation, and I said, you know, it's been an intense travel season. Thank you, Chris. And we have 5 children, and I want to be with my kids. And I realize 5 is a small number for these parts. But, you know, we try to keep up with the local context. And still she persisted and said, no, we're doing you got to come because we're going to talk about domestic religious freedom. And you know, when you do these things, you're like always looking for the angle. And I was like, now I got her. Because I do international religious freedom. So I deigned to quote the immortal words of Austin Powers, international man of mystery. And I said, Elizabeth, that's not my bag, baby. End quote. And she said, I need you there. I love Elizabeth. I love Cole Durham. I love Brett Scharffs. We have worked together for almost 20 years all over Asia. There is nobody better than to work with them. If you want to be known by the company you keep, work with the International Center for the Study of Law and Religion. If you want to execute with excellence, work with them. They're the best in the business, and you never have to apologize for your partners. It's truly a gift to the world. So I decided to come, and I started thinking about this, and the beautiful part about a beautiful question from a beautiful person is you start to wrestle with, well, what am I doing here? Why have I dedicated my life to religious freedom? Why do I care so much about that? And I am an American. I need to think about what the application is in my own context. So what I want to do is answer the question of the panel directly. Then I want to provide some context from our own story, from the domestic context, and hopefully that will be a tool for how we engage each other. The answer to the question, why is religious freedom important to me? Because it's the only thing that works. It is the only thing that brings together principles and practicality in a way that speaks to all audiences and serves all citizens. It's as simple as that. It is a philosophy of self and society and state governance, holistic from the bottom up of the individual and to the top down of the institution. It works, but it takes a lot of work to make it work. So that's my answer to the question. What's the context that provides that answer? In my travels overseas, what has been the number one lesson that I've learned? Everything boils down to the power dynamics between the relationship between the ethno-religious majority and the ethno-religious non-majorities. I'm not sure I like the word minority anymore. Somehow it sounds pejorative, so I say non-majorities. And religious freedom overseas in an authoritarian context is always number 15 on a list of 10 for that day for the local government official. They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to talk about it. So how do you make this work? One step would be to work with the non-majorities. That's very important, and I've done that with Uyghurs and Tibetans and in other places. Very important. But the thing that I have found that is the most useful and practical is thinking through how do you work with the ethno-religious majority? How do you give permission to them to participate in a new paradigm of inclusion that is consistent with the best of who they already are? And that's so important. As an American, as a gringo from the outside, we're always received as name, blame, and shame. Why don't you look like Thomas Jefferson? And forget the fact all of his many personal and institutional faults. What I like to say is, I'm here to come alongside the best of who you are. I'm here to walk with you in recovering and restoring the path that is already a part of your holy scriptures and your culture. And in those words, I think, are some wisdom about how we operate in our own country. How do we work with the ethno-religious majority, of whom I am a member, in case you haven't noticed, as a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, blue-eyed, fourth of 8 Marines and 2 generations of Seiple's person? How do we make that work in our own context? What's the story? What's the tool that we can use to think about ways of doing inclusion in a way that respects the inevitable, irreconcilable theological and political differences? So I want to tell you the story of Roger Williams. I think he's the most consequential American in our history. We don't talk about him much because he was so successful. And so Roger Williams comes from England. He's a pupil of Edward Cook and Francis Bacon, and he comes and he has the same exact theology as the Puritans. Nothing different. But what he has is a fundamental difference of what that means for living together in society. And the Puritans would say, you can worship any way you want as long as you agree with me. Kind of like Henry Ford. You can have any Model T you want as long as it's black. Good citizen. Good equality. Nice Fido. Fetch. Roger Williams said, hey, that's not how I read Scripture. And what's important about this story is that he is reacting from the best of his faith tradition, not despite it, but because of it. And I have found what working globally, when you root these values in your own holy scriptures and your own moral framework, that's where sustainability results. Because the majority and the minorities have found a common language of society. So what about this Roger Williams? He shows up and he starts speaking his mind. He starts saying things like the King of England doesn't have the right to give away the Indian land. He called it a public solemn lie. That's not going to win you friends. So he moves around. Oh, I've already done all these slides, haven't I? Sorry. Let me go back to the beginning, please. There we go. So he moves around all over New England trying to find a home, trying to find some friends, and he annoys everybody. That house on the right, by the way, is the house I grew up in New England, built in 1710, in the vast and wild borderlands between Massachusetts and Rhode Island, which is also to say I'm a Patriots fan and a Red Sox fan. and importantly, a Celtics fan tonight. But I digress. So Roger Williams is moving around, and finally they say, hey, you're out of here. And they really want to send him back so he can be executed in England. And his best friend, who represents the other camp, the Puritan camp, where you have to have all black Model Ts, he warns them, and Roger Williams flees in the middle of a snowstorm to Rhode Island, or to the areas west of Massachusetts, areas populated by the Wampanoag and Narragansett tribes. And he meets with them. Now, here's the essence of why religious freedom works. Because it's the right thing to do, and it's in your self-interest. You have both of those things together, things are going to work for the majority and the non-majorities. The question you have to ask yourself as he flees west to the Indians, why was he received by them? Well, it turns out in all those travels that you saw in the previous slide, he became friends with them. He talked to them. He learned their language. He did the first ethno-linguistic survey of Native Americans because he respected them as made in the image of God. He also wanted to convert them. He wanted to share the gospel. But he would not share the gospel in English. He wanted to share it in their own heart language so they could understand Jesus the way he understood Jesus. That's respect. Doesn't mean they have to agree, but you want to speak a language that they can hear. And so they say, and by the way, they're the majority culture there. What I love about this is he's before them saying, hey, can I be a part of this? This sets the pace. So the red ink there is self-interest. Indians know the whites are coming. It's good to be in good relationship with them, probably. Roger Williams' self-interest is, I got no home. I got nothing. But the blue ink is, this is going to be a safe place. Because of my experience and because of what I believe, anybody can come and have the freedom of conscience to believe or not believe. Okay. Well, how does this philosophy develop? That coin, by the way, is the 300th anniversary coin in 1936. Well, he starts figuring this out. He writes a letter to the city of Providence, and he says to them, basically, hey, imagine we're all on a ship, because this is all their experiences, right, relating to them. And the majority of the people in the ship are probably going to be English, white-speaking, Protestant Puritans, but there's probably going to be others. There's going to be Muslims, there's going to be Catholics, Jews, whatever. What is the best way for all of us to achieve our common goal? Well, the right thing to do is to make sure nobody is forced to worship as the majority. And if you note at the end of that blue quote, it says, if they have any practice at all, which is him making room for atheists. That's still hard to do in America today. 400 years ago, it was even harder. But why is it important? Because the social cohesion of the ship, of the state, of the officers of the state, the seamen who run the ship, have to make sure you get there, and the commander of the ship has to be in a position to provide for peace and justice. There's a balance. There is a responsibility to live out your faith from the bottom up, but there's a responsibility for the state to protect that responsibility from the top down in a way that everybody gets along. So his philosophy is evolving, and he's thinking about how he institutionalizes it. 10 years later or 9 years later, the Rhode Island Charter, colonial charter, comes about. It's a beautiful piece of work that most people still don't know about. What is the right thing to do? We want a flourishing state. This is not a former Marine's English, by the way. This is the actual English of the time, if you're already pointing out the spelling errors. You want a flourishing state with full liberty of religious concern. It's the right thing to do. Why is that important? Read the red. Because where that exists, it will give the best and greatest security to sovereignty and will lay in the heart of men the strongest obligation to true loyalty. What is he saying? If you repress the non-majority and you keep putting them down, they are more likely to agitate and rebel against the state. It is in your self-interest not to assimilate them and make them look like you. It is in your self-interest to integrate them, invite them to the common public table as equal citizens under the transparent rule of law. That's what this charter is getting at. And by the way, he believed this for women too. Men's the language of the day, but there's a quick famous case, the case of Jane Verrin. Some of you lawyers will know it, from 1638, where Roger Williams' neighbor, Joshua Verrin, doesn't want his wife to worship at Roger Williams' church. And he forbids his wife to go. And Roger Williams says, nah, she has the same conscience as we do. She gets to worship too. So this is how it gets summed up in 1670. It's a memorable quote. He could have tweeted this for a lifetime. Forced worship stinks in the nostrils of God. It's the wrong thing to do, and it will cause instability in your state when you force somebody to be assimilated. Now, and here's the last slide as I conclude. How do we know he was a success? He dies in 1680. 1790, 110 years later, George Washington is coming to Rhode Island. He is bestowing a political gift on Rhode Island because they finally got their act together and ratified the Constitution. And the head of the synagogue sends him a letter, which I'll come back to in a second. But the question you got to ask yourself is, why is there a synagogue in Rhode Island? It's still operating, by the way, built in 1763, because they are the stewards of everything that Roger Williams believed in. They embody everything that he ever hoped for, that a religious minority could worship freely as citizens of that colony at the time. And so the head of the synagogue sends Washington a letter. And Washington, being the good politician, basically plagiarizes the whole letter and puts it in his own letter back to them on August 21st, a letter that is read every year in Newport, Rhode Island, every August 21st. What is the right thing to do? We all have liberty of conscience. It's an inherent national or natural right. But what's the self-interest? Hey, the government's going to protect that right so we can all get along. We want social cohesion in a land of many nations and many beliefs. But you got to behave. You have to exercise your citizenship responsibly. Should demean themselves as good citizens. Then he returns to the right thing to do. Continue to be the best of who you are. Treat others as you would like to be treated. And if you do that, everybody wins. Everybody can sit under their own fig tree and not be afraid, which is a quote from Malachi, I think. Maybe it's Micah, but I think Malachi is right. So here's the bottom line. What's the story of the ethno-religious majority? How can that be used as a positive tool? How do you harness self-interest? How do you do the right thing? And when you tell the story, tell it honestly. This is 1790 when he sends the letter. Was everything good in America then? No. Had Rhode Island abolished slavery in 1752? Yes. Would Newport become a major slave trader? You better believe it. Face the sin. Face the wrongdoing. Use this kind of model to bring majority and non-majorities together so that we can celebrate what Roger Williams called the liberty of conscience for one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Seiple. That was beautiful and inspiring. And I'm a fellow New Englander from Maine, so I'm go Celtics tonight. Thank you for having me here. It is truly an honor to be here. And I love this question, what does religious freedom mean to me? Religious freedom is our best hope for our country and for our world. At a time when divisions threaten to rend the very fabric of society, when seemingly intractable disagreements split communities and even families, it is religious freedom that is our very best hope. That may seem like a strong statement, although we've heard some strong statements already this morning, which I love, but I have perhaps an unusual perspective on religious freedom. I am a walking embodiment of some of our current divisions. You see, I am a person who scares people. I am wait for it, a genderqueer, bisexual person, and an ordained Christian pastor. And I would guess that there is something about that statement that scares you maybe just a little bit, or perhaps is surprising. In fact, when I introduce myself in faith contacts as LGBT, I can watch the body language in the room and see a reaction. And when I'm speaking to LGBT groups and not wearing a clerical collar, but out myself as clergy, I can once again watch people recoil. It's okay. I'm not offended. I understand the reaction because that used to be my reaction too. I was 40 years old before I met my first out LGBT person. And I'll admit to you that I felt some revulsion myself. But I was in theological school learning to be a pastor, so it was important to me to be comfortable to minister with all people, no exceptions. And of course, you can guess my ugly duckling story. After a while, I realized that was me too, that I was LGBT. But as a new pastor and a lifelong follower of Jesus, this was a crisis for me spiritually and personally. It took a lot of study, prayer, worship, and wrestling with God before I started to feel comfortable in my own skin. And it took years before I realized that my being LGBT made me a better Christian and a better pastor. For a time, I thought God hated me. Why else would God have done this to me? But then I realized that God didn't hate me. God loved me then, and God loves me now. People often ask me why I stayed Christian. My answer is always the same. Through it all, God never let go of me. And being a follower of Jesus is too much a part of me to ever let go of God. But it's not because I'm clergy that I am passionate about religious freedom. It is because I am LGBT and an advocate for LGBT youth that I am passionate about religious freedom. And in fact, I believe strongly that religious freedom is the very best hope for the world and for people like me who are LGBT. Here's one reason why. I was recruited to Utah in 2011 to pastor a church in Salt Lake. And right away, I realized that I needed to work on LGBT youth homelessness and suicide prevention. Soon after, I was hired as the executive director of an LGBT youth center in Ogden called Outreach. And at the youth center, I quickly realized that every single LGBT youth there knew someone who had died of suicide. One young person knew 19 people who had died of suicide. And many young people there had already attempted suicide themselves. I also learned that of the 700 youth that came to the center, 1/3 were experiencing homeless. They had no place to sleep at night, some as young as 12 years old. So they slept out in camps and railroad cars. One found a safe spot in a tree near Temple Square. In the canyon above Salt Lake, near a homeless youth camp in the woods, there is a place called Suicide Rock because of these young people. So I did everything I could to help them. I did public events, I did protests, but I wasn't making any headway. That is, until I started working with and stopped working against people that I had blamed for the dire circumstances of LGBT youth, religious people, and institutions. It wasn't until I met Laura, a loving, active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and a legislative aide in Utah. Laura made all the difference. She hadn't met LGBT people before, but she cared about everyone, young people especially, and she knew that no child should be homeless or at risk of suicide. So Laura and I became collaborators in changing the laws in Utah. And in fact, because of Laura, 5 laws were changed in Utah so that LGBT youth could be safer and sheltered. Laura did all of this for one simple reason, as an expression of her faith. Laura and I are dear friends still, yet we don't agree on much. We have different political views, different theology, but it is Laura's freedom to live her faith, her religious freedom, that has saved countless lives then and now. Religious freedom is the key. As a bridge builder, a healer of the LGBT and faith divide, I have come to realize that what seems to tear the LGBT and faith communities apart, the fight over religious freedom, is actually what both movements need to thrive and survive. I am part of both movements and am well aware of the rhetoric and chatter on both sides. So I will be very frank here. For many LGBT people, the phrase religious freedom is what they think is code that is used as cover by people that want to take their very lives away. I'm going to say it again. For some LGBT people, that threat is palpable. Religious freedom is seen as code for a movement that wants to deny the very existence of LGBT people and to impose a white nationalist Christianity as the political and societal framework in the United States and world. When I talk about religious freedom in LGBT communities, people don't want to listen to me, and this is why. This is what they're thinking. On the religious freedom side, some believe that the LGBT agenda is to outlaw religion in the United States and beyond, and to remove the ability to and access to worship God. Many in the religious freedom movement see the LGBT agenda as wanting to impose an LGBT world order that would take away life as they know and cherish it, redefine gender and family, and destroy the moral fabric of the United States and world. So this is the frank truth out there. This is what's happening in a large part of the world. So it's easy to imagine that these two movements won't rest until the other is destroyed. After all, it's a matter of survival for each one. But there is a way forward that will not preference one over the other and will allow each to have the freedom to be who they are, to have not only respect, but also surprising allies that care for and about them. And that is religious freedom itself. Religious freedom practiced through and under the rubric of covenantal pluralism. Covenantal pluralism, simply stated, is mutual respect and standing up for one another without the need to agree on anything, except that human beings are worthy of respect and self-determination, as long as they don't harm somebody else. It is as simple as helping a friend, and here we're back to our theme of friendship, which is exactly it. It's as simple as helping a friend with a flat tire. If that friend has a different faith or political opinion, you still help your friend. That is covenantal pluralism. It can also be as complicated as coalitions working across difference toward a common goal, without requiring the other to agree with each other's convictions or beliefs. This is an old idea originated by Rabbi Ira Greenberg in the 1960s and reinvented more recently by the Templeton Foundation and their scholars in beautiful and exciting new ways. And covenantal pluralism doesn't require religious belief. What it requires is integrity and sincerity of conviction. And so covenantal pluralism includes those with deep Orthodox religious faith and those who disavow religion entirely. It is, in short, for every human, and it is a way for every human to share their best self with others, to transform and be transformed. It is a way to share faith and ideas to better each other and to better ourselves, all while staying true to our deepest core values. Covenantal pluralism also allows for those disillusioned by religion to engage with it again, to partner together to help one another for the good of the whole. For example, think of millennials who often run from institutions of every type, including religious ones. Covenantal pluralism attracts them to engage with institutions and with religion again, as people like me, like Laura, find each other to work together for the good of the world. Here's another example of covenantal pluralism. It's not in the news yet, but there is something exciting happening right now in this country. I just arrived last night from Washington, D.C., where I have spent the last month bringing delegations of LGBT people and allies from all 50 states to D.C. to meet with their senators and representatives. Moms, LGBT advocates, equality leaders, clergy, young people, families from all walks of life and all perspectives. These bipartisan and very diverse state groups are coming to D.C. to advocate for both LGBT equality and for religious freedom. This is a truly bipartisan effort with support from the most conservative to the most liberal, from faith and religious organizations and LGBT equality organizations. Among them are my dear friends from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the reason why? It's Laura's reason. They are living their faith. And this is covenantal pluralism in action. One young person simply said this to her senator: as an LGBT person, I need federal protections to survive and to live the American dream. I want to be married and have a family. And here she paused. But my parents and my siblings are people of faith. They need federal religious freedom protections to survive and thrive too. We need protections for LGBT people and for religious freedom, and we can have both. That is the work of today that ensures a bright freedom for our children, for our grandchildren. To me, it ensures peace in the world, and it's the reason we are gathered here today as friends. And I am so hopeful by what I have heard here so far today and what we will hear later today. There is more hope in the world than not, and religious freedom is the key. Thank you.
Morning. It's good to be with you. It's good to be with anyone. So, my story begins in a place where you might not expect. Texas. And I'm not quite sure why my parents thought it would be a good idea to leave their comfortable homes in India and immigrate to South Texas. But they did, and that's where I was born, along with 3 of my brothers. Brown-skinned, turban-wearing, beard-loving boys. Spurs fans, so thumbs down to the Celtics tonight, thumbs up to the Warriors. And as you can imagine, just as you look at me up here today, we faced our fair share of challenges by virtue of our visible religious identity. And it's not to say that life was terrible. We had wonderful childhoods. I love my upbringing. I would describe it as happy. I would also describe it as normal, which other people may disagree, but we all have our own experiences. And part of our upbringing also was dealing with racism on a daily basis because of how we looked, because of our religious identity. And those experiences really shaped my commitment to the work of religious freedom. And there are a few moments in particular as I was reflecting on the question for today. What does religious freedom mean to you? As Chris said, why do we care so much? For me, it's very personal. And as I was reflecting, I gathered 3 touch points that I want to share with you that, again, weren't the only moments, but they were formative, both in terms of my concern and understanding of the issue, and also how we can move forward. The first memory I have of being denied rights because of how I looked came when I was about 10 years old. My brothers and I went to a roller skating rink. It was the same roller skating rink we'd gone to dozens of times. It was right by our soccer fields and our baseball fields where we would play every weekend. And we walked in, and the manager must have been new, because immediately he saw us and came over and said, I mean, in a pretty angry tone, "Get out of here with those damn rags on your heads." And we had, even at this young age, had experienced our fair share of moments like these. We knew enough to know that our mom was with us, so she could do the dirty work. So the four of us walked away, and after about 5 minutes or so, it hadn't been resolved. And by this point, usually, it had been resolved. And so I walked over to my mother. We were getting anxious to go out there and join our friends who were there for a class party. And I tugged on my mom's kameez, it's her long shirt. And she turned around and she was crying. And I didn't know, I'd never seen her cry before. I didn't know what to do. And so I just started crying too. And she put her arm around me and said, "What's wrong? Why are you crying?" And I said, "Well, it's not fair. They should let us skate. This is unfair." And she said, "Oh, I didn't realize that. We're actually pretty lucky." And I looked up at her and, for a moment, as a kid does, thought my mom had no idea what was happening. And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, I shared with the teachers and the parents what's going on, and they've all agreed to walk out together. And aren't we lucky to have such good friends?" And it took me a moment to understand what was happening. And there were many lessons, actually, that I took that day in terms of what it means to share your experiences with others and give them the chance to care, in terms of the power of community, in terms of understanding your own commitments and principles and sticking by them. But the one I wanted to speak to today was actually about a feeling that I remember having in that moment. It was the first time in my life, in my 10 years, that I had felt that the people who were around me, my friends, I knew they were my friends. I didn't know that they cared enough about me to give up something they wanted or would have enjoyed to stand up for my rights. And that feeling, I didn't have language for it at the time. Right now, we might call it solidarity. I didn't know that word. I didn't know any frame for understanding. All I knew was the feeling and remembering these people have my backs and I want to do the same thing for other people when this happens to them. 10 years old, formative moment for me. There were many other moments like this over the years, and I'm happy to share them at other moments. But the next major touch point comes about 8 years later, when I'm a senior in high school. The fall semester has just begun, and we start hearing rumors during passing period that there was a terrorist attack in New York City. And we ran over to my high school history teacher's room. She was sort of our mentor, and a bunch of us, our small group of friends, went there and watched on the screen as the Twin Towers came down. Half an hour or so, nobody said anything, probably like many of you, just dumbfounded, right? You can't really comprehend what's happening. And about half an hour into watching the TV reports, they say they have a suspect. And they named a name that I hadn't heard before. They said Osama bin Laden. And then they flash his image on the screen. And my heart dropped. It's a turban, brown skin, a beard, just like mine. And, among my group of friends, I didn't have any concern. I knew that they knew me and knew what I was about. But I also knew enough and had experienced enough to understand that most Americans, wouldn't know me and wouldn't trust me, and that my life was about to change. And it did. There were many changes. I mean, it was swift and it was difficult, and you can probably imagine some of what we went through in the racist backlash that followed 9/11. And I want to share one particular, it's not even really a moment, it was an experience that I had in the days that followed. Because essentially what happened was we went home, we locked the doors, the death threats started coming in that day. And it was challenging because during the daytimes we would watch the TV and try to understand what happened to our country. And in the evenings, we would get on a national conference call with the Sikh community all over the country. And local leaders would report who had been attacked, how they were doing, and then move into strategy. What should we do? And the immediate impulse, as you can imagine, was to say, why don't we just tell people that we're not Muslims? And that will save us, and we'll be safer. And as I listened to the Sikh community around the country, I was in high school, right? I was in listening mode. I wasn't in teaching. I wasn't even giving my opinions. But listening to the back and forth and the community conversation was really formative for me, because what I learned through that conversation among leaders was, here is what we're going to do. It would be easier to educate people about who we are. It's honest. We'll just say, we're not Muslim, we're Sikhs, let's tell you about ourselves. But the actual implications are not in line with our ethics. Because essentially what we're doing by saying that is, don't attack us, go get them instead. They're the bad guys. And our faith teaches us that no one should be attacked for how they look or what they believe. And it was a tough conversation that we had at home with my parents then too. Because for them, they could create more safety for their boys and for themselves by taking the first approach. And now that I'm a father, I think about that. It's very appealing to me. I want nothing more than my girls to be safe. And so you understand now, and I understand now, how difficult this conversation was. But I want to take it back to what Chris's point was before, because this was the decision point for us as a community. We might be safer in the moment. It might feel better in that moment, but in the long term, deflecting hate, never the answer. You're not addressing the issue. And you're making life worse for other people. It's not the right thing to do, either ethically or strategically. And there was an example that I had heard many years before from our tradition that was raised through this conversation that has really guided me in my vision for religious pluralism, or as we just heard, covenantal pluralism. In the late 1500s, early 1600s, in South Asia, as the Sikh community was coming forward, there was intense religious persecution from the state against minoritized communities. And the Kashmiri Brahmins, a Hindu group, who were actually in many ways in the majority in South Asia at the time, were being persecuted by those in power who were in the minority. And they couldn't figure out a way to stop the persecution. And they eventually came to the Sikh Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib, and said, hey, we know you're of a different faith. We know you disagree with how we live and how we practice, but we also know that you believe that everyone should have the right to live in this way. And Guru Tegh Bahadur said, yeah, that's right. And I'm willing to stand up for you. And he did. He went to Delhi. He was arrested, imprisoned, and executed for his belief that other people, that all people, should have the right to live and practice as they are. And, for so many years, this felt like another level for me. I would never be able to reach a station like somebody who is spiritually enlightened. And in some ways, I'm very far from that. I think it's also important for us to recognize that there are examples within our world today, within our society today, where people have stood up and actually given up their lives for their principles. If you think about Heather Heyer, for example, who was killed in Charlottesville in standing up to the neo-Nazi marchers, the white supremacist rally. It's the same principle. It's the same animation. It's the same drive in seeing the light and liberty in everyone. I'll share one last example with you, one last anecdote that came up more recently in my life and has really helped me see more clearly what this looks like for us, not just for ourselves, but for our kids. And this moment, again, these are small moments if you look at this, when we compare them to the human rights violations and abuses and persecution that people all over the world face, including here in the States. But these moments for us can be flashpoints if we see them as such. And one of them that came up recently for me was walking through airport security with my girls before the pandemic. And my older daughter, had just turned 3. And you should know that for the standard policy, if you walk through airport security with a turban, the TSA setup is you go through additional screening, which is effectively racial profiling. Whole additional story, and happy to talk about that more. But here's what happened that day that was different. Over the years, I'd become accustomed to the profiling. And as much as it was annoying, it was also normal and didn't bother me so much. I'd learned to deal with it. But this day, I had my older daughter, we were holding hands walking through security, and my wife was carrying our baby to walk through security. And as I walked through, the TSA agent said, okay, your daughter needs to go back while we check you. And had done this multiple times with my kids before. It didn't really bother me until my daughter said, why are they taking you? Did you do something wrong? And this to me was the first moment that I realized what the implications of what our government was doing to me would do to my relationship with my daughter. I mean, it was heartbreaking. I'm not a dramatic person. I'm not someone who gets bothered by much, but that entire plane ride, that night, I couldn't sleep. Just thinking about what it means to live in a society where our kids are getting the message that they should be ashamed of who they are, ashamed of their parents. And if I'm being honest, I know that because I felt the same way when I was a kid about my own parents. And so the question for me then becomes, why care about this work? I mean, yes, it's about justice. Yes, it's about living with integrity and living by my values, which I would argue, and I think many of you would agree, that creates more happiness in our lives. Right? It helps us feel whole. It helps us have meaning. All of that is true. But this moment with my daughters, it's thinking about the people we care about. Future generations, current generations, loved ones, our elders. This vision for justice and liberty for all is not our reality today. We know that. There are some ways in which it's improving, some ways in which it's not. But I think, to me, the commitment for all of us, if we look at our closest relationships and the people we care about, and then ask the question, what does a good life look like? And what does it take for us to get there? That's where this principle of religious freedom fits in for me. Thank you.
Thanks to our panelists for sharing such, excuse me, I'm a little verklempt up here. for sharing such thoughtful, insightful, and personal messages with us all, and for modeling how we can do likewise in our spheres of influence. As Simran said, how we can see and share the light and liberty in everyone. I have just a few announcements that I'll run through quickly. For CLE credit, individuals need to be sure to sign the rolls at the registration desk. Those who ordered lunches can pick them up on the patio outside. Contrary to what is in the printed program, today's second breakout session runs from 11:20 to 12:20. It's not 3 hours long, it's just 1 hour long. And the sessions today will be here at the conference center, but the evening keynote session with Elder Quentin L. Cook and leaders from the New York City Council of Religious Leaders will be from 7 to 8:30 p.m. in the Hinckley Center, which is just on the main part of campus, just west of us. There will now be a short break. We should have already had our break and be in our next session, so we will take just as short a break as we can and get into our rooms, make that decision about which of those 3 wonderful breakout sessions you're going to go to, and move quickly as soon as you can so that we can start in those sessions as quickly as we can. Thank you so much.